Okay, so quickly before I begin this review, I'm just going to preface this by saying this will have pretty significant spoilers for the first F.E.A.R game, and I will probably get into some mild spoilers for this expansion pack. However, or maybe even significant ones, but I probably will preface those by saying spoilers or save them to the end or whatever. So, yeah, if you haven't played the first Fear, I highly recommend it. If you've seen my review, you should definitely get it. It's really cheap now, and I would recommend going in with as few things as possible. Um, so yeah, aside from that, uh, oh, one more thing. I'm reviewing the Xbox 360 Fear Files um, expansion thing. This is the F.E.A.R Files version, so I can't comment on the quality of the PC port or whatever. So yeah. So in F.E.A.R Extraction Point, it picks up pretty much straight. Well, yeah, almost exactly straight after F.E.A.R 1, and you play as Point Man once again. And in the game or the expansion, you're trying to navigate through the now ruined city of, I think it's Fairport, I believe it's called, to try and reach, you guessed it, an extraction point. Um, so starting with the pros, I I really enjoyed the creepy and kind of tense atmosphere of the first one, and for the most part, that's present in this expansion. And in some places, it's better as it kind of ramps up some of the psychological aspects. Like, there's these new enemies in the game that I don't want to spoil, but they have some really good creepy moments. And there's some nice playing around with psychological horror elements, which, if you know me, is my favorite kind of horror. Where like you'll go to a door, you'll open it, you'll down the corridor, try and open the next door, but it doesn't, and you turn around and you're in a completely different corridor. There's loads of like weird psychological abstract stuff like that in this, and I really like that in horror games or films. So yeah, because it wasn't all just jump scares, it kind of creeped me out in some parts. Also, the great weapon variety is back, and there's some added weapons, or there's an added weapon with this laser beam rifle, I suppose, that just fires a laser and you can just slice enemies up with it. It's wonderful and violent and is a really nice addition to the game that I wish was in the first one now. Um, and expanding on that, I didn't mention this in my F.E.A.R review, but in that, a problem was you kind of stuck to the same three guns because you had tons of ammo for them and they were clearly superior. Whereas in this, maybe you'd stick with one or two guns, but you would at least swap out one of them pretty regularly because ammo was a lot more scarce. And that was really nice actually because it encouraged me to kind of try out some of the weapons I wouldn't have otherwise used in the game. The graphics and particle effects are still pretty much just as good as they were in F.E.A.R 1, minus the big, wide open spaces where the graphics engine really does kind of show its age, because I feel it wasn't designed for these big, expansive environments. So the graphics do look worse, in my opinion, than F.E.A.R 1, and whilst graphics aren't a game breaker, it does kind of take you out of the atmosphere a bit when you look around and everything's just completely untextured in the wide open cities, which is kind of a shame considering we didn't really get to go out into the city in F.E.A.R 1 and it just wasn't really as good here. Like, I don't know, it's hard to describe it, just it didn't feel like, whoa, I'm in the city now, because the graphics just kind of held it back a bit. I feel the game tried to overextend a bit too much in that respect. The voice acting is of your teammates is still very good, with uh, them being Holiday and Jin Sung Kwon, I believe it is, off the top of my head. Um, just a minor side note, I believe the voice actor of Holiday is Sergeant Johnson, as I have that written in my notes, and that was kind of amusing to listen to. But slight pet peeve of mine was you still are faceless, nameless, and voiceless, and that really kind of took me out of it in some moments, because I really felt the point man should have been radioing and going, "Don't worry, guys, I'm still alive," or "Don't worry, hold in, hang in there, I'm on my way." So kind of took me out of the moment. Like, just say something, would you? But of course, Paxton Fettel is back. I'll get into that in a minute. And his voice acting, of course, is wonderful. I love Paxton Fettel as a character, and the voice acting for him is just so over the top and wonderful. And it was great to hear him in the game again, as he really does kind of breathe life into the series. The game, however, does have a few more normal and paranormal enemies, and that adds some more enemy variety, and that made it more entertaining to be fighting. But that's about all the pros. So getting on to the cons, probably the biggest one, and I think I left it out of my Fear review, and I'm punching myself in the face over it, is the difficulty spikes. In Fear 1, for the most part, the difficulty was fine. I was perfectly okay with it, but then sometimes it would just ramp up to ridiculous degrees, and that is very present here, especially as I would say there's about the same amount of difficulty spikes, but of course they're spread over a shorter amount of time, so it makes it a lot more tedious to play and really made it less fun than the original Fear. Another problem is the environments. The game starts off strong in this church, and it's more of that kind of almost campy ridiculousness horror, and that was really good. However, after that, it's really dull. It's like a warehouse, and you spend a lot of time on the subway, and that's just kind of dull after a while. And especially as they don't really use the frightening potential of that to the maximum effect, in my opinion. But the game does kind of pick up once again when you get to the hospital at the end. Um, with the scares picking up there again. However, it did begin to suffer a little bit from the common horror problem of can't something go right, where so many things go wrong that it just kind of takes you out of the atmosphere and makes you go, yeah, nothing really is going right, and it just kind of takes away from the horror in that sense. Another disappointing thing was the world is developed very little from Fear, and whilst I really liked the world in Fear, it was disappointing to not see it expanded in any really meaningful way. And what they did introduce that was new wasn't adequately explained. Like, getting into some minor spoilers here for Extraction Point, Paxton Fettel comes back as a ghost and reactivates all the replicas. However, I have no clue how he does this, as we shot him in the face at the end of Fear. And whilst you may want to point out, oh, but, like, there's. He was a ghost in Fear 1, I didn't get that vibe. I thought he was just, like, psychologically projecting himself. And that's how he appeared everywhere to mess with you. However, I thought after shooting him in the face, he would be slightly less able to do that. And I'd be fine if they explained, oh, he's psychic, that makes him a ghost. I'd be okay with that if they actually said that, but they don't. He just appears and reactivates every replica, and that really annoyed me, because it's just like, Please, would you just explain this? I'm really interested in your world, but you won't explain how this stuff is happening. And this problem's further brought, like, I can't think of the word. This problem's further developed by um, the answering machines, which were good in Fear, and obviously the problem was you had to sit there and listen, but I was okay with that because I really liked them. But in this, they're really bad. Like, I'm not exaggerating here, one of them was essentially this. Hello? There was an explosion, are you alright? So that was really disappointing to see. And the problem, another problem is the setting doesn't feel destroyed enough. Because at the end of Fear 1, there was that massive explosion you miraculously survived. And at the end of that, I was under the impression that was a nuclear explosion. However, in this, the city looks fine. It's deserted, and they're like, oh, the replicas have taken over. But the city seems pretty much fine. It's just deserted. There's a couple of corpses every now and again, but nowhere near enough for me to go, oh man, this city got wrecked. And I felt like, oh, wait, so did it just blow up a couple of blocks? And the ending really didn't help this, as it looked destroyed at the end. But until then, I've just been fighting through a ghost city, which isn't as cool as it would sound, because the only ghost is Vettel's magic one and Alma, obviously. In fact, there's a couple of ghosts. You don't really fight them. Yeah, that was really disappointing to see. The setting was just, oh, it's just the same. And the graphics would have worked better if they'd just wrecked the city, I feel, rather than leaving it in pristine condition, pretty much. And another problem is the ending. It's not very good and just leaves you going, wait, what just happened? But I'm not going to go into too much detail on that yet, as I'll save spoilers till after I've given my overall thoughts. And before I recommend it or not, I'm going to quickly touch on the value of this. So, this is my favourite kind of expansion or DLC, where it takes the base game and uses it as a jumping off point to do whole new levels, areas, story, whatever. It doesn't just take random areas from the first game and slap them in a new order and quickly type out a story that isn't very strong and be like, oh yeah, a whole new team went in, or oh, here's things from this character's perspective. That, yeah, this acts as a nice supplementary piece to uh, Fear, Fear 1's ending. However, this is part of. This game is non-canon. Playing this will not inform the events of Fear 2. This is part of something called the Vivendi timeline, which is a whole mess I'll probably talk about in my Fear 2 review when I finally reach that. And so, don't play this expecting the story to ever be paid off, because it never will. Ever. And that is kind of a shame, but okay, you have to accept that. So, the gameplay is still great like Fear 1's, so I would only really recommend this if you're a huge fan of Fear 1 or the story, but even then, don't go in expecting this to be paid off. Just go, okay, here's how things could have gone, let's see. So overall, the Fear files are cheap enough that I would recommend Extraction Point if you have Fear 1. However, only if you are a big fan. If you're just kind of passive, because also the quality when it's good is probably not much, but a bit higher than Fear 1's. Quality when it's not is much lower than Fear 1's. So it ends up feeling not as good despite this, as it sinks much lower than Fear 1 in quality when it does. So that's a shame, but yeah, overall, it probably does get a recommend from me, just with that little asterisk of only really if you're a Fear fan, but only really if you're a Fear fan would you be interested in chasing this up, probably. So yeah, there's my final recommendation. Now I'm going to briefly talk about the ending, so if you don't want that spoiled, stop watching, I suppose. Alright, so the ending.
You fight through the hospital, you get to your chopper, it explodes, and you hear Paxton say something like, "Well, guess we're gonna kill them," and you just kind of have to go, "Kill who? You and I? Me and Alma? Who, who are you talking about, Paxton?" And then you don't get an explanation, and it ends with you just staring out at the desolate landscape, just with a slow pan and the credits. So yeah, that really wasn't satisfying in any way. Like, it wasn't a good cliffhanger. It's just one that made you go, what just happened? What is going on? But of course, we'll never get it explained because not part of canon. There's my review of Fear Extraction Point. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm glad to see I can sort of keep to a schedule now. Don't know when my next small talk will be out. Next reviews, I just got Volume 1 of Ultimate Spider-Man, Ultimate Fantastic Four, and Ultimate X-Men, so I may do a review of one of those next, but no promises. I'll be seeing Gone Girl soon, hopefully. Maybe, if I feel like doing a review, maybe I'll do one of that. And Alien Isolation or Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor, one of those I may do a review of at some point, but that won't be next week. That will be a while from now. So be on the lookout for those if you're interested at all in my channel. And thank you for taking all this time to watch me ramble on about Fear Extraction.